Hello, hello, hello. 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 Hello. I think you guys can hear me now. I'm pretty sure because I have a little audio thing right here that shows volume. I think there's someone here, but I'm not sure if there is anyone here. Put something in the chat. All right, cool. Solid. All right. So I'll just start talking until all right, I'll just start talking until someone has a question. Put it in the chat, and then yeah. Okay, let me pull up that document that I shared with you guys yesterday. Push review. No wait. Drive. A push review. All right. Cool, cool, cool. I think I could share screens on this thing too, so that's kind of cool. Let me see. All right. Share screen. Um, Give me a sec. Go to. Never mind. I don't think it's gonna let me. All right. So let's just start talking. All right. So first we'll start with let me open up on my phone. First, I'll start with the pre-Columbian societies. So once again, I think what I'm going to do is I'm just gonna start talking with that study guide I gave you yesterday, and then I'm just gonna keep it moving. Um, if anybody has any questions or like wants me to talk about something else, then yeah. But I'll just keep talking. I'll just keep talking. I'm sure you guys are getting ready doing other stuff. And yeah, all right. So let's start with pre-Columbian times. So long story short, this was before Columbus came or any European came to colonize. This was pre 1492. Um, Basically, what that was about was what you need to know is that the Native Americans, they were all different. A lot of times people assume that they're all the same, that they all lived in teepees and they all had the same language. They were all super duper different. The main thing that you need to know is like their culture depended on where they were from. Like the types of food they ate depended on where they were from, whether they stayed in one place and set up like a permanent community, or they were nomadic. It depended where they were from. For example, like Native Americans from California uh, typically were like had permanent communities, largely because the food grows so well here. There's a lot of rivers here, So since the food source was pretty permanent, then the communities were pretty permanent. Whereas in the Great Plains, they were not. The Native Americans were nomadic because water was scarce. They hunted buffalo, and buffalo like moved around. The land in the Great Plains wasn't very arable, so it was for that reason. There couldn't be a lot of permanent housing, so they were nomadic. They lived in teepees, stuff like that. So yeah, that's the first one. That was pre 1492. Next, let's go back to colonial times. Let me see if I could do this. Oh, I think I can share. All right. I believe I'm sharing like a tab. All right. Let me see. Let me make it small. There. Oh, there it is. Cool. Um, no, I do it like this. Okay. So, colonial times. So, long story short, this was, you could say, 1607 to 1754. 1607 was the very first colony, which was the colony of Jamestown in Virginia. This was a whole John Smith, Pocahontas, all that stuff. And the main thing you need to know from this time period is, as time went on, the colonies, they were not all the same. They were You had the northern colonies, the middle colonies, the southern colonies, and the Caribbean colonies. The Caribbean and southern colonies, they were like money oriented. These were the colonies that had slavery. I don't think you'll need to know this, but 1619 was when the first slave was brought over to the southern colonies. Uh, and 1619, and that's important. That's not important to know like the year, but that's the southern colonies and the Caribbean colonies were the ones that had slavery. Northern colonies, that was a whole Massachusetts Bay Colony, super religious, John Winthrop, like Puritans, all that stuff. And the middle colonies were more diverse. And the so as time went on, like people were, they started developing their own identity. Like the northern colonies had their own thing, middle southern colonies had their own thing, their own culture, their own economies, because they were different, right? They were different land, all that good stuff. Um, and then some of the things that happened during this time was the first Great Awakening that kind of brought people together, right? Because everybody was experiencing the same thing. And then you had the Enlightenment that also brought people together because they were like experiencing the same thing. But one thing that it did is it pushed people away from the king and queen a little bit, just because like the Enlightenment was a scientific movement that said like, hey, not everything is like ordained or explained by God. Something is just because we're human in biology. And that didn't really sit well with the king, because the whole reason the king and queen and the monarchy was legitimate was because everybody understood, quote unquote, that that they had power because God selected them. So if people stop believing that God is the reason for everything, then maybe there's no reason for a king and queen. So the king and queen, they didn't really like the Enlightenment. Okay, so then you head into Revolutionary War time. The Revolutionary War time was you could say it started in 1754, 1763. Here's the distinction. The 1754 was the start of the French and Indian War. The French and Indian War was the French and their Native American allies versus the colonists, the British, and their Native American allies. So they call it the French and Indian War because it was the French and the Indians versus the colonists, British, and other Indians. Um, Long story short, the British won. With the colonists and the British won, they defeated the French, and the French got kicked out of what would become the United States. Right? If you remember, I showed you guys this map when we were learning about that, where I wonder if, huh? No, let's not do it that way. Okay. Um, so basically, this war happened, and it had a lot had a lot of ramifications, had a lot of effects. All right. Number one, the colonists, they kind of didn't like the the British soldiers. The British soldiers were very condescending. They're very like mean and rude to the colonists because the colonists didn't have like an official army. It was just people with guns. And also, the colonists, they saw that the British soldiers, they weren't so tough, you know? So they were human. So that kind of, you know, put the picture of the colonists, like put the picture in their head that, hey, maybe we could take these guys. They're not so tough. So basically, that happened. And then the real drama started happening after the French and Indian War. So the French and Indian Wars ended in 1763. That's key because you have the proclamation of 1763, and that's the announcement the king made that the colonists could not go west, settle west of the Appalachian Mountains. That was a problem because the whole reason the colonists even wanted to fight is they wanted to acquire French land because so they can get more settlements. If you remember, there was like no more land for like many colonists. Um, they were like farming for somebody else, and many colonists, they wanted, their own farm, their own freedom, start their own businesses, make their own money, all that good stuff. So when the king said, colonists, you can't settle west of the Appalachian Mountains, many of the colonists were really upset because the whole reason they fought was to have more land. So um for that made the colonists mad. And then on top of that, the king started taxing the colonists to pay for this war. Stamp Act, Tea Tax, Townshend Acts. There was these taxes that the colonists didn't like. So there was many reactions. There was like the protests, the boycotts against the Stamp Act. You had the Boston Tea Party. You had the Boston Massacre. There was so many back and forths during that time period. Just conflict, 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 conflict. So eventually, you had the First Continental Congress trying to say like, "Hey, let's figure out how to work together." But eventually, it got to the point where the relationship couldn't be mended, and the colonists drafted the Declaration of Independence, and that was it. So that was the Revolutionary Wartime. Once again, if anybody has any questions, just put it in the chat. I'm just going to keep going through this list right here of stuff. But if you want to just hear anything specific, put it in the chat and I'll talk about it. So, uh, the colonists won the Revolutionary War, and now it's Articles of Confederation and Constitution time. So you could say this is like the 1780s. You could say. Long story short, the Articles of Confederation was the first government that was drafted by the United States. Um, Let me see. Hold on. Let me try it this way. Hold on. Let me see. Let me see something. I'm just gonna see if maybe while I'm doing this, I can share the screen of the website. So like you guys can see the website of what we learned while we were learning this. So maybe you guys can be like, oh, I remember that. Let me see. All right. So we went over that. The long train of usurpations. That was the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Paine. That's a good thing to remember. He was talking about how there was like it didn't make any common sense for the British, a small island, to control the colonies, which are so big. American Revolution, Declaration of Independence. Remember, we read the whole thing. All right. Women during the Revolutionary War. That's a nice little piece of outside information, probably. How some women were dressing up as men to fight. Some women would like pick up the guns of their fallen husbands, or like women would fundraise money, or like cook food, or sew uniforms, stuff like that. Okay, cool, cool, cool. Articles of Confederation. So The government made the colony on purpose, because the and that's because the colonists, they got tired of having like being under the British government, because that government was so strong and powerful and overbearing. So the Articles of Confederation was made purposely weak. Some of the examples is that there was no president, there was no army, taxes were optional. And those are the biggest ones. So the country existed under the Articles of Confederation for a few years, less than 10 for sure. But then what happened is you had a rebellion, Shays Rebellion, right? A lot of these poor farmers who were soldiers in the Revolutionary War, who fought against the British, who thought things were going to be better, they realized that things weren't better. They were going bankrupt. They were losing their farms. They were going to jail, because back in the day, if you owed money, you went to jail. So they rebelled. They fought back. They fought against the government, and the problem was, since there was no army, like the government couldn't fight back. So these people that were rebelling, under the leadership of Daniel Shay, they just kind of like destroyed cities, right? And there was no one to stop them. So long story short, eventually they were stopped, and then there had to be a situation where the founding fathers like George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, all those people that were involved in making the government, they had to be like, well, we have to fix the Articles of Confederation. So while they were trying to fix them, the decision was made, you know what, instead of fixing them, why don't we just start all over? Like, why don't we create a whole brand new government? So that's when they decided to create the Constitution. Oh, Shays Rebellion, Constitution. All right. So when the Constitution was created, let me get this out of the way. Like I said, if you want to hear anything specific, put it in the chat. So the Constitution was created to make the government a little stronger, right? So in one class, what we did is we reenacted it, because there was just like more kids. But anyway, long story short, was the basics that you need to know about the Constitution. It made the federal government stronger. There was the people that wanted to make it stronger were called the Federalists. The people who wanted to make the federal government weaker were called the Anti-Federalists. There was a few compromises. Number one was uh, the fact that there was going to be a president, but the president was going to be president for 4 years. Another compromise was that they were going to have a Bill of Rights that gave listed the rights that the people have and put restrictions against the government, right? Then you had Washington's presidency. The main things that you need to learn about Washington's presidency is one, I guess, like starting the national bank that made the government stronger. Um, him wanting to stay neutral and not help France. That was kind of not so much of a strong move, because France helped the United States, but the United States didn't help France. That wasn't seen as a very popular move, but it was necessary. And he also warned of political parties. Then you had John Adams's presidency. He was mostly known for the Alien and Sedition Acts, violating the First Amendment by taking away people's freedom of speech. And then that was Unit 3. Now let's get into Jefferson. Long story short, Jefferson, before we get into that, is Jefferson was more of a like, he was the first Democratic Republican, which is basically like an anti federalist, like someone who doesn't want the federal government to be powerful. But he was kind of like the opposite of that, or he went against his ideals, because he had the Louisiana Purchase, and the United States buying a whole bunch of land, that's a big power move, but he just thought it was a good deal. So he's more known for the Louisiana Purchase. Okay, once again, I'm just gonna keep going through the like little review plan thing. I just passed the early presidents. Now I'm going Andrew Jackson time. So like I said, if anybody wants me to talk about DBQs, LEQs, or like something, just let me know because I'm just gonna keep it moving. Let me know in the chat. All right. Let me see. We'll get to Andrew Jackson. Let me make sure if we're gonna get to yeah. So I'll just go through this too. All right. So we also had the beginnings of oh, judicial review. That was there was a famous court case, Marbury versus Madison. All that did is it gave the Supreme Court power of judicial review. Judicial review is a fancy way of saying like um, when the Supreme Court makes a decision, it impacts everybody who's ever in that similar place. We already know that, but the name for that is judicial review. And the court case that established judicial review was Marbury versus Madison. Okay, Missouri Compromise. So this happened in 1820, but a lot of times we talk about the Missouri Compromise during the time period of slavery because it was kind of like, I don't want to say the first time, but the first like real major time where we see this conflict of how the acquisition of land is going to lead the to more issues surrounding slavery. So the Missouri Compromise was the whole Missouri wanted to come in as a free state, um, but slave state Missouri coming in as slave state, Maine free state, and they did that line, the 3630 line. I wonder if it's here. No, I didn't put it on the map. All right. During this time, you had the market revolution. This was like the very beginnings of the industrial revolution in the 1920s and 30s. You had the invention of the cotton gin, steam engine, those sorts of things. Cotton gin, most important one. Slavery was dying, but when the cotton gin was involved, that kind of got slavery going. Okay. Telegraph, steamboat, all that stuff. All right. Okay. Now let's get into Andrew Jackson. So Andrew Jackson, his whole thing was he was the type of president that was talking about like let's limit the role of the federal government, but his actions kind of said otherwise. Um, One thing that he did to limit the power of the federal government was getting rid of the national bank. The things that he did to like grow the power of the federal government was the Trail of Tears. He just kicked Native Americans off land. Like that's a big government power move. Um, and another thing he did is like even by getting rid of the national bank, he got rid of the national bank by vetoing the national bank. And like vetoes, typically up until then, there was like presidents always had a reason to do the veto, like a whether they thought it was unconstitutional or not. He just vetoed it because he didn't like it. And that set the precedent where presidents can like veto things just because they don't like it. And that's a big power move, right? So anyway, we did all that. First LEQ, History Day. Okay. All right, now we're done with Unit 4. Now let's get into Semester 2, Unit 5. All right, so this was so as you can see, oh, we did talk about Manifest Destiny. We'll talk about it in a little bit. All right, issues surrounding slavery. You had so many things happening around and during Unit 5 surrounding slavery. Unit 5 was all about slavery, Civil War, Reconstruction. Okay. All right. So, well, let's talk about the whole stuff with Mexico first, and then you know what? Let me give me like 2 minutes. I gotta get my breakfast, so I'll eat my breakfast and talk. Just give me 2 minutes to get my breakfast set up. Hold on. right, don't mind me. I made my overnight oats as doing this. Oh yeah, a bunch of you guys had your first day of work yesterday at the fair. Let me know in the chat how it went. All right. So anywho, where were we? Oh yeah, Mexico. So you had this idea of manifest destiny, right? If you remember, uh we analyzed this painting about how the United States had this idea that like it was their God-given right to extend from the Atlantic to the Pacific, right? So basically, many Americans felt that that should happen. So Mexico was in the way. So the United States instigated a war with Mexico because they knew they could win because Mexico had just gotten their independence, and the United States won, and they acquired so much land, right? So, make this real quick. Um, yeah. So, the United States also acquired Texas, right? Before the war with Mexico. There was a whole controversy with the Nueces River and all that stuff. Long story short, the United States just kind of took Texas and then instigated the war with Mexico. And now all of a sudden, the decision has to be made. How does California come into the United States? Because the war with Mexico is from 1846 to 1848. But then in 1849, gold was found in the United States. And for the United States to profit off of that gold, California needed to be part of the United States officially. So in 1850, California was brought into the United States, but that's going to be a problem because that's going to throw off the balance. So they came up with the Compromise of 1850, and within the Compromise of 1850 was the Fugitive Slave Act. So the Compromise of 1850 had a lot of parts, but the two main ones that we need to know are this: California comes in as a free state, and the federal government institutes the Fugitive Slave Act. The Fugitive Slave Act is a law that says if a runaway slave runs away from the South to the North, and if a northerner, doesn't snitch that person out, that runaway slave out, the person who doesn't do the snitching gets fined, jail, or both. This made Northerners very upset because, like, I'm not saying that all Northerners didn't like slavery, but many Northerners definitely didn't want to have that responsibility of like, oh, it's your responsibility of snitching people out, or else you can go to jail. For example, never mind, no time for examples. All right, let's keep going. All right, more things that happened. So you had the abolitionist movement, you had Frederick Douglass, you had William Lloyd Garrison out there in the United States talking about abolition, how it's messed up. And they were coming from different perspectives. Frederick Douglass was a former slave, so he was coming from the perspective like, hey man, like I lived it, slavery, it's not cool, very brutal. William Lloyd Garrison was more of a religion slash constitution type of guy. Like, hey, God wouldn't really want this type of situation. The Grimke sisters, like Angelica Grimke, she was also an abolitionist. She came from a wealthy family that owned slaves, and she's like, dude, my family owned slaves, and it was pretty messed up. So, like, there was just different abolitionists who were coming from different. They're arguing against slavery from different perspectives. Okay. Um, oh, here's some other abolitionists. You had William Lloyd Garrison, Frederick Douglass, John Brown came from a different perspective too. We'll talk about him right now. All right, Kansas, Nebraska Act. So I don't have a map. It's okay. If you remember, Kansas and Nebraska were trying to come in as states. According to the Missouri Compromise, Kansas and Nebraska were both supposed to be free states because they were above the 3630 line. But many people wanted Kansas to be a slave state. The argument was like it was right next to Missouri, on the west side of Missouri, and people were making the argument, hey, it's a natural extension of slavery. Like it's just supposed to keep going. Kansas is next. So the solution, popular sovereignty. Hella people started moving to Kansas. One of them was John Brown, and it was just like a whole messed up situation. They called it Bleeding Kansas, right? Um, Dred Scott, long story short, this was Dred Scott. He sued for his freedom. There was this whole backstory about like why he deserved his freedom. Long story short, went to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court said, no, Dred Scott, you can't have your freedom. Technically, only people can have freedom, but you, my friend, are a property. And the Constitution says people have the right to property. So, um, any law restricting property is unconstitutional. Therefore, any law restricting slavery is unconstitutional. Therefore, slavery is legal everywhere. Big L for the abolitionist movement. And this really made people upset. So you got to think about all these little conflicts that we already talked about, made people really upset. So people were already on edge. And then we have the election of 1860. Hold on, have a bite to eat real quick. Like I said, if you have questions, put it in the chat. But I'm gonna keep going. All right. Long story short, election of 1860, Abraham Lincoln won. He was down to keep slavery in the southern states, but nowhere else. But once he won, the pro-slavery Southerners were like still saw him as hostile to slavery. So he said, you know what, we're leaving. First state to secede was South Carolina. Civil War started. Long story short, the North, they had the advantages that they had more people, more resources, more factories. The South, their advantages was that they're like they had home court advantage because like the war was happening there, and they had better soldiers and better leadership. But long story short, the Northerners won, and then that led to Reconstruction. So Reconstruction was this time period in the United States that was from 1865 to 1877. 13, 14, 15, free citizens vote. This was a time period where the United States was being rebuilt politically and physically after the war. So, some major things. There was all these reconstruction plans. Remember, like Abraham Lincoln, he was trying to be like somewhat harsh on the South, but not really. But then he got assassinated, so his vice president Andrew Johnson took over, and he was trying to be real lenient on the South, but the Congress vetoed his Reconstruction plan. So then you had congressional Reconstruction, aka military Reconstruction, where the military was going to be in the South, making sure the rights of African Americans were being protected, right? So this and the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, 13th, 14th, 15th free citizens vote gave secured like rights for African Americans. So African American males were allowed to vote, which led to, for the first time in history, African Americans having political power. It was going okay for a little bit for African Americans, but then in 1877, Reconstruction ended. I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but Democrats and Republicans made a deal to end Reconstruction, and this was the beginning of the Jim Crow era, where just Black people kind of lost a bunch of their rights again. So this was the era of sharecropping. This was the era of the KKK. I believe in 1899 you had Plessy versus Ferguson, where it was a Supreme Court case that said that separate but equal is okay. And I think that's it for Reconstruction. All right. Let's see. Next we have Gilded Age, Progressive Era, and then all the new stuff. So let's get through this quickly because we got like 15 minutes left. All right. Now we are, I believe, in Unit 6. All right. We're making our way through it. All right. All right. All right, let's see here. All right. Civil War is over. So this unit 6 is like the Gilded Age unit. Starts with westward expansion. War is over. The United States has hello railroads. The United States can focus on the economy now that the war is over. So you had hella people moving west, farmers, miners. You have all these laws like the Pacific Railway Act, which like the government was building railroads, the Homestead Act, which was the government was giving land away to people if they were down to settle. And this is like the whole Native American boarding schools type of time period, which was really brutal things that were done to Native American people. Okay. And then let's see, you had westward expansion, you had all these new technological innovations, railroad, steel production, coal, communication, with no electricity here. Well, electricity also. And this stuff powered like the industrial revolution, right? This allowed factories to like exist. Bridges were built. Light bulbs allowed factories to be open 24 hours a day. So it was, it really had a big impact. Let's see. The rise of industrial capitalism. You had very wealthy people exist and they had a lot of power, right? You had Carnegie, Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, those types of people. Labor in the Gilded Age was very like there was no labor protections. Like it was really bad. Like for if you were a worker, you had a real tough time. Um, there was a lot of immigration and migration during the Gilded Age. Immigration, people coming to the United States from other countries, like from Italy, Germany, things like this. And then migration is like people were moving within the United States. People were going to the northern cities for work and the western cities for work. All right. Um, During this time period, because there was many immigrants, you had the beginnings of like cultural towns, like Chinatowns and little Tokyos and stuff like that. So that just seems like a good piece of outside information. If there's like an essay, something you have to write that has to do with immigration during this time period, talk about like how immigrant communities developing their own like communities like within the United States, like Chinatowns and little Tokyos and little Filipino towns and little Italies, like all that stuff. He had the development of the middle class. So all of a sudden, even though work was brutal during this time period, like people did were able to make more money a little bit. So there was a development of the middle class, the gospel of wealth. Andrew Carnegie, he was one of the very wealthy people, and he said, "You know what? I should probably give a lot of this money away because, like, do I need to die with all this money?" Um, we'll talk about the reform movements later. There was a lot of corruption, like during the Gilded Age when it came to the government. Like the government was already looking the other way because you had laissez-faire, which is the government was like hands off of the economy. But then again, like a lot of politicians were being bought out, or maybe even the wealthy people were just the politicians because they had so much power, and a lot of people didn't like this, right? This is a very popular political cartoon. I wouldn't be surprised if it ended up in your test. Long story short, this is the Senate, part of the Congress, and these are the senators, and these are the business owners. And basically, what it's saying is like at the time, business was way more powerful than government. They ran the show. This was what it's arguing. And I believe that is it for Unit 6. Let's keep it moving. Unit 7. All right. All right. So this is we pick up after the Gilded Age, aka the Industrial Revolution. The United States is now like a world superpower. They went through their Industrial Revolution. The United States has so many resources; it's so vast. The United States is now the most powerful country in the world, pretty much. Back in the day, the way countries showed their power is they took other countries over, aka imperialism, aka colonization. So the United States starts doing that. They start taking over Cuba, the Philippines, Guam, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, all these places, right? And the first one was the Spanish American War. USS Maine explodes. Supposedly the Spanish blew it up. Whole war, bang bang, Spanish American War. United States takes over. The United States takes over Guam, the Philippines, Cuba, Puerto Rico. Now the United States is an imperial power. During this time period, you had the progressive era. The United States is all of a sudden, with the government and activists are fixing some of the problems that was created by the Gilded Age. So you have like the Pure Food and Drug Act, the Meat Inspection Act. You had the very first like social workers, the very first like things, all like that type of stuff. Like the modern welfare state was being born during this time period. Um, you had like the Sherman Antitrust Act that was trying to like end monopolies. You had the beginnings of prohibition, like trying to make selling alcohol illegal because that was a big problem too. So you had this was a time period where the very beginnings, I guess you could say, of liberalism, like the government trying to help people out. All right, U.S. enters World War One. It was because of the Lusitania and the Zimmerman Note. All right. Oh, you had like little pre-COVID during this time period too. That's a nice little piece of outside information. Influenza, 1918. Um, Sedition in World War One. Remember, you had Schenck versus the United States, like the limiting of civil liberties during wartime. The 1920s, all the changes. Remember, we looked at all these pictures. Jazz, Harlem Renaissance, the people who were against like modernity and wanted to like go back to like super religious times, invention of the radio, so on and so forth. 1920s, Great Depression, uh, and then the New Deal, right? This was a big example of liberalism. Okay, the New Deal, and then the United States starting to get into the war. Remember, in between World War One and World War Two, America's foreign policy was like, "Hey, man, we want to stay out." Like, if you remember, Britain was like under siege from Germany, and the United States was trying hard to stay out of it. They were like, "Yo, Britain, like, we can't help you. We can't even. We'll sell you weapons, but you got to come and pick them up because if we ship them to you and the Germans sink those ships, and we got a problem." They were like America was like, "Yo, we'll let you borrow weapons. Give us the bullets back once you're done using them." That sounds silly, but the United States was trying hard to stay out. But finally, Pearl Harbor ended that. The United States started mobilizing for war. It was a state of total war. Like the whole society got transformed. Women started doing jobs that they weren't being asked to do. Like there was the draft, but people were signing up to go because people really felt during World War II that this was America's fight because America literally got attacked, right? Um, America's policy, the military strategy was like, hey, let's go defeat Germany first in Europe, and then we'll go defeat the Japanese. That's what happened. Battle of the Bulge was the last battle in Eastern and then European front. And then over here in the Pacific front, you had the Battle of Midway and island hopping. And then finally was like the whole nuclear bomb, Little Boy and Fat Man. After the war, you had the beginnings of the UN, which was like a global organization that sought to like stop war and talk it out type of situation. And that's that. All right, let's go through this quickly. Unit 8. Cold War, Red Scare, Joseph McCarthy. McCarthy is calling people out for supposedly being communists. All right. Economy and culture. Business was booming, right? You had the GI Bill, which was helping a lot of former soldiers out, buying houses. You had the baby boom, so there was more demand for houses. So there was a lot of jobs to create and build houses and roads and bridges and cars, since everybody had a car. So business was booming during this time period. People were trying to like conform to societal norms because nobody wanted to be called out for being a communist, but then people were also rebelling. You had the whole civil rights movement during this time period. You had the whole civil rights movement during this time period, the African American movement, then you had the gay rights movement, Chicano movement, Asian American movement, um, LGBTQ movement, women's movement. So basically, everybody was like, not well, not everybody, but people were trying to get rights. Like that's what was happening during this time period. Let me go back to the Unit 8. And let's see here. All right, we're almost done. Let me just talk about the Vietnam War and the Great Society, and then that's kind of it. All right, so the Vietnam War. So we'll talk about the Korean War and the Vietnam War together. As globally, the what the United States was doing is it was trying to like spread capitalism. If you remember, the USSR was communist, and the United States really wanted to like end. The United States really wanted to end communism or stop communism from spreading, right? So um, the United States was trying to influence countries to be capitalist and not communist. Two ways was the Marshall Plan and the Truman Doctrine. Basically, the United States was giving money to countries to kind of rebuild them because the United States knew that communism was really appealing to like people who are struggling. And if a lot of countries were struggling after World War II because they were literally like broken from war, so the United States gave them money to rebuild the economy and to like, hey, look, the United States is your ally. Hey, look, maybe you should do what the United States says. So the United States was trying to influence capitalism all over the world in that way. They were also doing it in other ways. If you remember, the United States was out here like assassinating like presidents or like getting rid of presidents from other countries just because they maybe seemed a little communist. So we're talking Iran, we're talking Guatemala, El Salvador, Cuba, all that stuff. Remember the Cuban Missile Crisis? The world almost ended because of this like domino theory of the fear of communism spreading. So Korean War. Long story short, after World War II, Korea was split in half. The North was influenced by Russia and China, which are communists. The South was influenced by the United States, capitalist democracy. And they basically fought against each other, and it ended a tie pretty much. And Korea still split in half. We have North Korea, South Korea. Vietnam, very similar. If you remember, Vietnam reached out to the United States because they wanted to have their freedom. The United States left them on red, and then there was a whole war. The United States supported the South, the USSR and China supported North Vietnam. They fought for a long time, like 20 something years. The United States was caught lying about this whole situation. Like the United States was out here saying that the war was going good for the United States when reality was going really bad for the United States. Eventually, like people found out that the government was lying. You had almost zero support, American support for the war, and Nixon got elected and he got the United States out. Um, Once that happened, you had kind of like the end of liberalism, like liberalism being the government using its power to help people. And people stopped supporting that because people stopped supporting the government. Like there was too many scandals. So people started trusting the government less and less. So you had the end of liberalism because people didn't trust the government to like do anything right. So you had the start of conservatism. Conservatism is like the government having less power and doing less and less. And that was the time of Reagan in the 80s, ending the Cold War, space lasers, bang, bang, bang. All right, you guys, that's kind of it. You guys are going to do great. If you did the extra credit study sheets, I'll take them after the test. Very good luck today. I know you guys are going to be doing great. While you guys are working hard, I'll be chilling, thinking about you guys. But any final questions, just put them in the chat. I got about like 6, 7 minutes before I got to go get ready. But let me know. No notebook, you guys. Sorry. You have a question, Carla? I know you are. I know you are. Good luck. Just go in there with confidence and finish the test. No matter what, just finish it. Even if you're just putting stuff down. Key units, I would say 3 through 8. Definitely don't trip on 1 and 2. You could probably get away with skipping. No, definitely don't trip on 1 and 9. Maybe you can get away with skipping 2, but 3 through 8, probably the biggest ones. It's gonna be fine. Don't worry. Just finish the test. All right, go to the tech room. I believe they're in the tech room. Make sure your Chromebooks are charged. If you're already at school, get your Chromebook charged. As far as writing, it depends. If you're writing for the SAQ, the paragraph should be 2 to 3 sentences. If you're writing for the essays, for example, on the DBQ, if you're writing an ACE body paragraph, but you're combining documents, you probably need like a topic sentence, a sentence to describe both documents. So that's 3. And then 1 to 2 sentences to elaborate on each document. That's like 4, 5, 6, 7 sentences. And if you're just doing a paragraph where you're describing like just one document, probably like 5 sentences. Yes, 6 or 7. Yes, sir. All right, you guys, I'm gonna get going. I'm gonna start getting ready and all that stuff. I guess I'll see you guys. I don't know. I guess like around lunchtime. Probably won't see too many of the 6th period people because you guys will be testing during class. But I'll definitely see period 3 people. Good luck. Bye.